Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 2023 Carbon Leadership Forum of Boston Northeast Reuse Working Group. Today, we'll get into it in a moment. We have a great presentation from members of CROWD. We have Jennifer Miner and Susan Holland representing Central New York and a lot of their efforts towards a circular economy. We've had presentations and discussions like this before. 2 months ago in April, we had Goody Clancy and AA 2030 present on the CARE tool, taking a very data-driven look at embodied carbon and really seeing, does a retrofit, does a renovation make sense in the broader carbon scheme? Today, we'll look at not only what the CROWD crew and Central New York is looking to do, but really see if we can pull best practices, as a lot of the movement right now with looking at embodied carbon, especially at deconstruction and reuse, seems to be really taking off like wildfire. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. You can look to add any comments in the chat, and we'll moderate that, and we'll open it up as well if you want to ask your questions. Laurel, anything to say before we get into presentations?
No, I just dropped in the chat. Actually, it looks like we've got some new folks joining us today, which is exciting to see. And just to keep the introductions quick, if everybody could drop in the chat, your name, what organization you're with, and where you're calling in from. And then if we have some more time at the end after the Q&As, we can do some more intros then too.
Awesome. So with that, we'll hand it over to Susan and Jenny. Please take it away.
Oh, great. Thanks for having us today. Yes, we are in Central New York. We're based in Ithaca, New York, actually. If you don't know where that is, we are a little bit south of Syracuse, kind of really in the middle of the state, southern tier. So we're going to talk today about saving embodied carbon, embodied history, and embodied labor. And I'm Susan Holland. As Michael said, I'm the executive director of Historic Ithaca. And Jenni Miner, she will be talking to you in a couple minutes after I get through a few slides. And she's the director of graduate studies and associate professor at Cornell and the city and regional planning. And she is also the director of Just Places Lab. So, and Ithaca is indeed the home of Cornell University. So just in case people didn't know that. Jenni, want to do the next slide? So we're going to talk today about our group called CROWD, which was the initials, the acronym was given to us by a couple of our grad students, Anthea and Jason, a couple years ago. And we are a preservation and reuse alliance, and CROWD stands for Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development. And we began in 2020 as a network to build a more sustainable built environment around New York State. And we're composed of preservationists like myself, planners, policymakers, architects, salvage and reuse professionals, university labs, and more. And we'll talk a lot about that and give you some examples of what we're doing. And so it's been a movement in support of building and using building reuse through preservation, but also deconstruction. We have a pretty heavy deconstruction focus, and to realize the environmental, societal, and economic benefits. And in sharing today, I just wanted to, we're going to highlight the work that we've done that contributes to the development of deconstruction and reuse, and as preservation strategies, and the technology tools that we're using, that CROWD is using. But I think one of the most potent tools that I'd like to share with you is that our collaboration is between our community and university and preservation and different fields. And it actually, we're calling this, we were just joking with Michael and Laurel and saying it was our COVID baby, our pandemic baby. We started this right as COVID happened, but there's a real reason why. But this is our sort of circular economy, if you will, our circular work, where it's deconstruction, reuse, and the circular economy. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done with CROWD and education, community engagement, policy and practice recommendations on the screen, green jobs and skills creation, and resource and research and resource development. And Historic Ithaca came into it well, I'll go to the next slide and kind of explain how we sort of entered this. So in the end of 2019, I don't know if you've read about Ithaca and what they've been up to, but we had a bold Green New Deal set together by what they called the Sunrise Movement. A lot of students here, kind of in the model of serious activism. They came from, it was a very young group of folks who convinced the city leaders to do a Green New Deal, which was great, I think, after AOC said it. And it was in 2019, kind of the end of 2019. And they had some very, very high goals, high level goals to achieve carbon neutrality community wide by 2030, ensure that those benefits are shared with all of the community to reduce historical social and economic inequalities, and building retrofits and electrification were in motion to achieve these aims. And then buildings were not in there at the beginning except to talk about the decarbonization, and we entered this space by talking about building and building material reuse, but we kind of came at it a genesis of a program, kind of in a back way, I guess, or an unexpected way. And so also Ithaca, which Historic Ithaca has also been involved in, we represent all of the existing buildings in the city. We work with them on the preservation level, but we do a lot of other work to talk about our building stock is quite old, like you would all probably have in Massachusetts, a lot of wood frame and brick construction, early, late 19th, early 20th century. And Ithaca also had this aim to decarbonize all of our buildings, not the new buildings, but every single building that's here at 6,000 buildings. And that's kind of how we entered this space. And so we started a project. And then if you would, this building is the Chacona building in College Town. It's where you basically enter College Town. And Cornell sits like, I don't know, 300 feet from this, the entrance sort of to their buildings. And between upzoning, in College Town, and the idea that we were going to, reconfigure College Town because of the needs of the university, and some with the town as well, the city, the city, it's the city of Ithaca. We tried tirelessly in 2017, it was before I actually started here, to landmark this building with local landmark status under the planning rules in the city. It was quite the interesting conversation, and it did fail. We failed. Obviously, you can see the failure right there. And it sits right out, again, it sits right outside of Cornell, and it's been here, the building's been there since the beginning of the 20th century as a real fixture for Cornell University. And so Historic Ithaca also has significant elements, which is our 30-year-old store that is an true architectural salvage operation. And we salvage, part of our mission, we salvage buildings like this. And we went in and we found some pretty remarkable things. We were also, this is a very beloved corner, College Town Bagel sat on the left, and Rulof's, which is a bar, sat on the right, a very beautiful Victorian style bar, all wood. I think I know where it is now, but I'm not sure. We did not take it. So Jenni, you want to do the next slide? So this made an impossible preservation save, and this is what we saw at the end of its life, as it was coming down and after we had salvaged the inside. The refrigerator here is my symbol of, I guess no one was really in there taking things. We don't take appliances or anything, but this is all the wood that was wasted and thrown. This was all thrown to a landfill, every bit of it. You can see it had some, you can see it. And then inside, you can go to the next picture. Inside, when we were told there wasn't much in it, see the white windows here? Those are leaded glass windows, actually, and we were able to take those out and repurpose them. There's chestnut wainscoting down below. which ironically was sold recently from our store to the person who's running our electrification program in the city. He didn't know it. So it's that's a really good circular economy story. But there was a lot of discovery. We had very, very, very little time to salvage this building. And so we ended up deciding that this was a project. We were electrifying buildings, but what are we doing about our waste in the city? And that's how our project Crowd was born. This was also a pivotal project for us. This is a foreclosed church, if you can believe it, in the city of Auburn, which is about 45 minutes away. I was actually just there last night. History is in their tagline. And this building was slated to come down. We got there very late. Jenny's just going to show a little video of the inside of this amazing, very old growth wood. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So this actually also Harriet Tubman, who I'm sure you know who that is. She is probably Auburn's most famous resident, and her church, she was not in this was not her church, but she had visited. She was local there for a very long time. She lived a long life. And one of our Crowd partners was on the historic commission in Andy Robley from PACNY, which is the Preservation Association of Central New York, was alerted to the fact that this was going to come down. We met with city leaders. We also knew that we got to the city leaders very late in discussing this church. We probably could have saved it or deconstructed it had we gotten there early and had a better plan, but it was very new for us. So it taught us some lessons. Jenny's gonna talk a lot about the research that's being done, but this was part of the research from the Cornell lab, one of the Cornell labs run by Dr. Felix Heisel, and it's the Circular Construction Lab. And they measured all of the components of the building, and then they modeled it to kind of start thinking about the embodied carbon, what you'll see later on in the project and in the slideshow about the church and what that showed us. And actually we actually had a receiver for the materials, a group here at local in Tompkins County called Quarter Acre for the People. They are providing access to local farmland for local families, for people of color and indigenous ancestry, as well as refugee families who have historically been displaced from land. And they were willing and able to work with us. We searched every possibility to get some funding to do affordable housing, basically, but we were not successful. Our timing, it probably was not a good time or timing for us. So and we found out as we started doing this work, in the US alone, construction and demolition debris, and you all know this, amounts to roughly 600 million tons annually. And just look at my percentages again. And which is it's double the amount of solid municipal waste, and a lot of energy is spent on that. So we had our projects cut out for us, and Jenny is going to talk about some of the things that we've been up to with Crowd. So I'll let Jenny take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Jenny, and I am one of the co-founders of Crowd with Susan and others, and I'll talk about those other partners. My lab is the Just Places Lab, which is a forum for research and creative action centered on memory, imagination, and the socially just care of places. The lab that I frequently collaborate with is Felix Heisel's Circular Construction Lab, which is focused on transition to a circular economy. I know now that I'm really preaching to the choir, but the crowd partners, I think we're really trying to demonstrate how preservation, deconstruction, and reuse really contribute to this transition from an economy where we extract materials, use them for only a short amount of time, and then send them to the landfill, where carbon is then carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases is the immediate result. So what we're trying to do is really build a circular economy where we're elongating the lifespan of our building stock for as long as possible. We know that it is a carbon storage and it has many much value. And then with design for disassembly and deconstruction of those buildings not designed for disassembly, we have some reuse that can then build a circular economy. So we believe strongly that conserving buildings and building materials really saves embodied carbon, and see a full spectrum of reuse options from preservation of landmarks and ordinary building stock to options around moving buildings, to preservation of existing buildings with overbuilds and extensions, hopefully that use reclaimed materials, of course, saving the heaviest carbon elements of buildings, such as foundations, when the rest of the building can't be saved, and deconstruction, which we believe is much better than traditional mechanical demolition. So what I want to do is show a brief a brief video. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound. Please clue me in if you can't hear the sound within the first few seconds. Are you hearing
The built
music?
environment is
It
one
works.
of the key players in climate change. Buildings are responsible for 40% of carbon emissions globally. And so we have to change. This is not a question. The question is, how do we change and how quickly can we change? That really is the question.
I'm really into trees, and to save this beautiful 100-year-old oak, this chestnut, 8-inch wide chestnut boards that are 12 feet long with gorgeous green. I mean, it's something you can't even get anymore. Beautiful fir. The structural lumber that was in these houses is, I think invaluable in a sense.
If we tear down a building in 1-2 days, just putting it all in a dumpster and carrying it to the landfill, that is cheaper in terms of how many labor hours you put in and what kind of equipment you need, but we carry societal costs that result in climate change at the end.
So I'm going to encourage you to watch the rest of the video, which is available online, and then just give you a brief tour of our other activities, demonstrating to the local public, regional, and throughout New York State options or alternatives for demolition. This was an exhibition that we organized within the Tompkins Center for History and Culture that really went through the environmental injustices that are associated with demolition, engaging students and community members on site. And the flip side of this sort of mini exhibition was really emphasizing preserving community value. So what you see in the image on the right is various elements that were salvaged, and the Circular Construction Lab added tags which have the embodied carbon equivalents listed on them, as well as the economic value. And other crowd partners have been developing materials. This is the Crowdsource, a New York deconstruction resource guide that was produced by the Susan Christopherson Center with help from the rest of us crowd partners. They also produced a deconstruction guide for local government. This was the first guide, and the Just Places Lab and the Tompkins Central New York group including Susan, Christine from Historic Ithaca, and a whole group of students have worked to create an alternatives to demolition through deconstruction and reuse guide. So within this guide, which is available on the Crowd website, as well as my lab website, you have recommendations to support deconstruction, a kind of primer for local governments on deconstruction and circular economy. We have case studies, a draft sustainable deconstruction resolution, and a draft ordinance. So this really takes local governments through initial actions, incentives, and regulatory approaches, and includes what I think is a really fantastic graphic by Wyeth Augustine Marcial, who is within the Just Places Lab and just graduated, and is continuing to work with us after graduation. But he has created this built on typical reduce, reuse, recycle type hierarchy, but this shows the preference for building maintenance and preservation, and then adaptive reuse and whole building relocation and other options, and then deconstruction as being superior to demolition and recycling. And again, I encourage you to take a look at the local resource guide, which includes case studies across North America, including regulatory and other policy approaches. Another area of research that Crowd partners in my lab have been working on is really studying demolition permitting process and activity within the city of Ithaca, which we use to develop a policy guide initially for the city of Ithaca, and that we then turned into a resource guide for local governments within New York State. We've been working on using spatial statistical methods to understand demolition activity, and also factors associated with adaptation of existing buildings. So this is with the aim of really understanding past practices and spatial patterns, and then predicting and influencing the future. So that includes a new collaboration with the Real-Time Urbanism Lab, which is also in Cornell's architecture department. And we're using agent-based modeling to understand developer choices and a range of choices about where they invest within the city, and then how they invest, whether it's in preservation, deconstruction, and new build strategies. And then I think the really exciting part of the agent-based modeling project is actually that we will be engaging developers and Crowd directly. So we're working to not just model behavior, but influence it. We've also created a Wasted Imagination tour, which we'll be launching next month. And that shows opportunity sites, missed opportunities as well, but then also putting the Catherine Commons deconstruction and other fantastic preservation projects on the map for a broader public within the city. And then another really fantastic offshoot of this effort is the Research for Change South Central New York initiative, which is it's a new student organization that my lab is incubating, led by Naji Abdul Jalil, and he is bringing some experience with photo voice techniques, which is working with youth to take images of where communities are in need. And then there's an interviewing technique. It's a really fantastic engagement and research technique that then can be taken to policymakers. So he's focused on environmental injustices associated with demolition, documenting those, and then also opportunities for deconstruction. He's working with a demolition and deconstruction contractor in Binghamton. And I think this is just a fantastic initiative. He's already received, I think, 6 different grants and awards for this project. And this summer is developing the first of what I hope is many engagements with youth in Binghamton. And I think this is another slide really from our students who presented within the Build to Reuse conference. And it just shows a range of different projects that bring together community and university partnerships. And I also wanted to mention the crowd conversations. So this is a series of conversations that we've had where we've invited speakers such as Stephanie Phillips from the city of San Antonio, Sean Wood, formerly at Portland, Oregon, now at the EPA, Baltimore. We have students who are presenting thesis work. And it's a really fantastic conversation. I guess not unlike what you're doing there at the Carbon Leadership Forum in your group, but really underlining the value of having these conversations and sharing expertise so that we can work toward, instead of these sad endings like this pile of rubble from a National Register landmarked building, a series of new sustainable buildings and sustainable beginnings and climate action that is really centered on alliances between preservation and reuse, and architecture, engineering, planning, and town and gown alliances. So with that, I want to say thank you and encourage you to take a look at our website and resources, and that of the partner crowd organization or the crowd partners. There's a growing number, so these are just a few of them. Now we have crowd partners throughout New York State, including Tap Inc., the city of Auburn. I was just there this week, and they're very interested in moving forward with potentially an incentive program or demonstration. So again, where we had a sad outcome, potentially we have climate leadership. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to add on just one thing. We meet regularly. We have a standing between the two different, we have a couple different subcommittees now, because the group is so large, and some of the things we want to work on we need to do together. So we have a standing meeting, I think every Monday for a different group at 9 a.m. So it starts our week off with work that we like to do, work that we're happy about, and work that we feel like we're making a difference. So it's been great. And one other thing, I said I would do this during the meeting and I forgot to tell Jenny, but I would invite all of you, because you are in Boston, 3 hours from you, over the first 2 weeks of July. I'll send Michael the information. I can send it to the whole group, I guess, about there will be a deconstruction project that they'll be doing training. May Boley from Savannah, what's the name of her group? How come I can't think of it off the top of my head? They're out of Savannah, and they teach deconstruction. So for a certain amount of money, if you're a student, you can go for free. I believe they'll waive the tuition. There's a tuition level, but you'll be actually doing real deconstruction on a historic building, on a property that's next to probably one of the oldest properties in New York State. It's the Maybe Farms, and next to that, it's the Schenectady County Historic Society. Repurpose Savannah. Thank you. Thank you. So that's happening next to you. A lot of us will be there, and hope to get some of the policy makers and local people that are interested in that in the capital region of New York State. So that'll be happening in the next couple months, next month. So I think that's it. Yeah,
And there may be a few other resources. I'm realizing that we didn't incorporate that some people may be interested in specifically. So for instance, the Circular Construction Lab has a new Rhino-based tool that may be of interest. They also have model RFP for deconstruction that I was just referring the city of Auburn to. So again, there's lots of different efforts. It's sort of like this amazing eclectic puzzle that we're all like a piece, and we're coming together in lots of different ways to work towards climate solutions.
Well, thank you so much. I'll open it up for the Q&A, but I'll start with the question I think, Jenni, to your point, there are so many different levers that need to be pulled and kind of synergies that can be realized. I would ask both of you before we go to the group, if there was a single, almost a wish list, a single thing that you believe would either make what you're trying to do crowds work or really kind of unlocking in Ithaca a much more circular economy. Is there anything that immediately comes to mind, whether it be policy, whether it be workforce development, but just kind of that one thing?
Do you want me to go first? Because I have a very strong opinion. I probably have the strongest opinion of our group. Policy wise, the city of Ithaca actually has a waste. We have created a resolution for them. So I would say policy, Michael. I'm never sure if it's going to be doing deconstruction. It's going to be volunteering, developers and people with a lot of stake in their time and money are going to just volunteer to do it. Some of them are, we have a couple, or is it going to be policy work that's going to drive it? So policy work and getting some sort of deconstruction ordinance. So at the local level, because New York State also has municipal home rule, which we make all the rules, and the city of Ithaca has a lot of demolitions happening, more than the others in the county. They have made a pledge to us that we have a resolution written for them and a law written for them. They with choices for them, kind of a model that they could follow. They had an intern this summer or this past spring working on it. It has not been introduced yet, but people know it's coming. And then on the state level, we have a great very much into climate change, action and climate action assembly person that could bring it to the New York State. So there's some work being done on both of those levels. And then combining, it seems like, or maybe I'm just more aware of and not living in my preservation bubble anymore, that the state and the EPA, the EPA, state waste management, the county waste management here are all working on new plans and new scoping and work plans for the next 10 years. So we're kind of involved in all of that and really, really working hard to put our comments and our thoughts together with that. So I feel like there's a lot of attention being paid to this idea. So that's my long answer, but policy in capital letters for me.
I think we just need a total paradigm shift. I mean, I think we need to stop thinking that we can just throw buildings in the landfill. And I feel like embodied carbon has been systematically left out of a lot of tools until very recently. So I think fully accounting for embodied carbon could really shift our understanding of how we care and account for change, how we steward building stock within cities. And so, looking to some of the precedents within Europe, where there's I think better legislation and accounting for buildings at the end of their lifespan and perhaps looking forward. So even going beyond existing deconstruction ordinances, I wonder if eventually, and Ithaca may not be the first place to do this, but what if we required in the planning process a plan for what happens to materials at the end of building's lifespan, even as a building is being proposed? So really thinking longer term. I mean, there's many different approaches, I think, and priorities, and so speaking for other crowd partners, I think they would say a better materials marketplace, a sort of exchange and hub model. So I know, for instance, Finger Lakes Reuse is very interested in the idea of circular hubs throughout New York State. And then there's also, is this a more digital approach, or do we have physical infrastructure and hubs throughout the state that can really keep building materials that are reclaimed very local? Because we know to build a circular economy, we really need to reuse those materials very close to home. So that's another factor. I guess I could go on and on. I feel like there's so many different priorities, but I also just believe that we need a change in imagination around the built environment, that really many people still see construction or don't see construction and demolition debris. They don't know what goes into demolishing buildings or constructing buildings. And, there's, as Gretchen Worth likes to say, there's much more awareness that we shouldn't be using plastic bags, or, that we should be composting food. But these enormous buildings around us, a lot of people, even though they're caring for their homes, right, and they're using buildings continuously, everyone should be aware of the climate impacts in construction and demolition.
I think, and to that point, I think visually seeing, if once people see a demolition, it's pretty, it's like seeing a dinosaur. It's loud, it crunches, it makes noise. It's very symbolic of what you're doing ultimately. When I was in Albany, I am the queen of demolitions in New York State, I believe. Somebody in Buffalo might be able to beat me, but I was on hundreds of emergency demolitions in my last job, which was historic Albany, and there was one a week at least. And to see that, I remember my one staff person saying, "Wow, I never knew what you were talking about until I was actually standing on site to hear it." And when you see it being crushed down, and you think, my goodness, it's like, I need a board for something in my house, I need a trim, and there it goes, right? And you can't do a thing about it. So it's very, that visual is so, even the movies say it and show it, but when you're standing there, it's really something. So I think that's a important component of what we're doing. Yeah.
Sure. And before we go to Allison, I will say, to Jenny's point, there's a quote out there: "Waste is a lack of imagination." Essentially, waste is a lack of creativity,
Imagination, yeah.
which, when promoting the circular economy, I think goes a long way. Allison, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Allison Frazee, Boston Preservation Alliance. Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting and informative and inspiring. I think we're having a lot of the same conversations and asking the same questions, but you guys seem to have really moved ahead on some things. So one or two quick questions. You used the phrase overbuild. Are you using that to mean an addition, or?
Yeah, vertical expansion of buildings. So an addition atop, which we have one example in Ithaca.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But many other cities have other examples, for sure.
Well, if you know, well, I asked because I'm working with the planners here at the City of Boston, and they've asked for some design language around building on top of buildings downtown. So, our really dense urban core, and putting an addition on top. And I think that's because they finally embrace the idea of reusing buildings, but they still want to allow for development. So I haven't been using the term overbuild, but that's interesting.
The building that's it's called the Carey Building here. And ask me for the spell. Is it CAREY, I believe?
It is.
It's the Carey Building in Ithaca, New York. It was done by Travis Hyde in probably early aughts, maybe 2000.
A little bit later.
Yeah, somewhere in it's I came here in 2017. It was done, but probably just. But yeah, there needs to be some more of that as well. And the other picture that we showed with not necessarily an overbuild, but a facadectomy, which actually that one turned out to be a really good project. They kept a facade, the Ironworks building, and they actually just won a local AIA prize for good architecture for a new building. So, which is good. We don't
Yeah,
get that. We don't get that too often.
previously I was in Austin, Texas, and there were quite a few examples from Austin. But those are, I guess, a decade old now. I've been at Cornell for 10 years. So yeah, there are other good examples, I'm sure, that are more contemporary, like the Carey building.
Carey building, yeah.
Doesn't work everywhere. And I also want to point out, it would be much more sustainable if that overbuild is using reclaimed materials. So I feel like we need to build more of a database of successful developments, whether they're additions or whole new buildings that really substantially use not just recycled materials, but reclaimed materials. And there's barriers to that. I mean, there's definitely limitations to what you can do owing to building code and other specifications on it. Again, the Circular Construction Lab is a bit more knowledgeable about some of those limitations in terms of the specifications, but I know there may be people, I guess, in your group that are working on that issue.
I hope, yeah. International building code would have to change quite a bit for building materials and and those things. But we've also realized, as we're doing the state agency work, like our solid waste plan for the state falls within the Department of Environmental Conservation, which covers, as I say, everything from fish to to waterways, everything. And so they have 24 departments, but if we called out something in the circular economy and said, these materials need to be recycled or reused, we then have to go to a different agency altogether to start having them work together. And the governor, I think she had put out an executive order recently, Governor Hochul, that has some parts of that, and they formed a New York Green Council, which sounds like a lot of other places. So it's a group of agency heads that should be working together on the material waste of the state. So we'll see how that comes out. It may have been attempted before. We weren't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, to see how that plan actually looks and then ends up in our communities in some way, in some meaningful way. So we shall see. Not to disparage state agencies in any way, but it's just, is some actionable items. We'd like to see those coming out of that.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or come off of mute. I did not see any other than Allison asking for a public pledge, which I think on that point, Allison, I think there are a lot of either advocacy groups with pledges, public pledges, things like that, that are very much needed. And I think some agencies are asking for them to really put pressure on larger either state groups or even in mass with the new kind of Office of Climate, oh goodness me, I forgot what it's called, but there's a new essentially climate czar who is looking for comments, as well as the new Massachusetts climate action plan is refined. Michael Elliott, we can go to you.
Hi, good afternoon. So I heard that term circular hub, kind of caught my attention. Heard that term used, and I'm wondering if you can sort of tell us a little bit more about what the purpose of a circular hub is, and how do you fund it? How do you get people excited about it? What is that exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
And one of the master's students in the regional planning program did an exit project looking at circularity hubs and the concept for them. So I can definitely refer you to her work. I'll put that in the chat when I get a second here. But in general, the idea of circularity hubs, and it could vary depending on whether you're talking about sort of county by county infrastructure that allows for or supports intake of deconstructed materials, and then facilitates a sort of exchange. And there are examples like outside of Binghamton, the Eco Center, but that's really a volunteer free exchange. I think with the circularity hubs, the idea would be developing something that actually functions to both as infrastructure to take in materials, but then also facilitates more economic exchange associated with the materials. So yeah, there's a spectrum of ideas around what circularity hubs could consist of, and the extent to which they would also include, for instance, workforce components like deconstruction training, or other ways to facilitate jobs within that, within the building a circular economy. Yeah, there's different models for them. I wish Diane Cohen were here to talk about her vision for them.
I can
Because
speak
I
a
think,
little.
yeah,
speak a little about
there's
it.
sort of a spectrum of ideas, and
Yes.
I know that another colleague and crowd partner has a grant proposal in to look at potentially reclaiming or using vacant school
Schools.
buildings as circularity hubs. And again, I'll point you to this exit project that a student finished that talks about some of the requirements of a circularity hub. So there are some things that would work well in a vacant school building, others that may not. So, and then just how many one would need to really facilitate a statewide system needs further research from my perspective. So I think there's a lot of like questions, and it's a fantastic idea. And if we had, let's say, New York State funding or like a federal initiative to really envision circularity hubs as this large scale infrastructure, we need to do something big.
Money.
Yeah. We need money, and we need to sort of flesh out the requirements for fully, creating this model where we eliminate waste.
And I think the marketplace, we're trying to create a marketplace too, because that's the second biggest question that we get asked when we talk about practical solutions to this idea is, what's your marketplace look like? Part of it, again, is whatever the building codes look like to be able to reuse at least some of that stuff. We have the toxin issue, of course, but there's a surcharge. There's some recommended legislation right now through New York State's draft scoping plan that we're looking at from the Department of Environmental Conservation that talks about a surcharge that would be to the waste contractor, basically, that would come to either the municipality, but what would that be utilized? So kind of like a community benefit, if you will, that that money could be used to offset us someone developing a grant program somehow. The startup costs are going to be big, I can tell you, because it's not developed in a lot of ways, and it's really a paradigm shift of how we're doing business. We have, again, we have a salvage operation. We also have, I did not say this, a job training program where we do a lot of repair and restoration skills with our store, and we have these are young adults with barriers to employment, but we're also, Finger Lakes Reuse ourselves, are connected to a hub of people who are doing basically green jobs. So this gets into that mix, and the labor comes from there. And there's more money. It seems like there's a lot of money coming for workforce development. We know we have issues. Not everyone is going to go into a college track. I am really excited about thinking about that. And then, one of the part of that could be a trade school for, altogether green new jobs. We have a gigantic almost million square foot project coming in here. That's an old factory, a big factory, and there's a ton of partners. They're going to restore it for it's basically going to be a mixed use complex, and part of their idea is to have a place where workforce development is done. That might be a place where people are getting trained from that circular hub. We could actually put a store up there too. We've all been in the space. We helped actually Felix Heisel again with his architecture students. We went in there as a project a couple months ago. They just did their exit projects a couple weeks ago, and we all walked in there and gasped. It was so much space. So that's part of the issue too, is the space piece here. At least a lot of places in New York State are distressed, but in Ithaca and Tompkins County in particular, land is at a premium. So anything we could sort of, those malls that are going to go out of business, that's, you know, we're like, that's Diane. Actually, Diane thinks that's the best space because they have loading docks, they have room, they have space and light and heat. So we're looking. But yes, Michael, I see where you're from, and if you had any thoughts, let us know, because we're kind of starting to work towards this idea. Yeah, so
Well, thank you. That was very helpful. Yeah. I mean, Mass DEP does now have a deconstruction work group headed up by my colleague, Kathy Merzer. And I try to keep her apprised of everything happening in this dynamic team. But we also have a partner on this team. He's not on the call today, Randy Scott. He's been with a demolition contractor for years and years, probably demoed as many buildings as you've been on, Susan, maybe more.
Oh, wait, let's see. Ask him his number.
He's probably worked on some of the buildings that you witnessed.
Yeah.
'Cause, you know, they go all over the place, but
Yeah.
He is actually trying to create you know, kind of what you're describing as these circular hubs. I don't think he's come up with that name yet, but you know, I think, you know, we should maybe look and see if there's any synergies there between what he's trying to do. He's trying to create hubs all up and down sort of the New England coast, from like Providence, Rhode Island, up to Bangor, Maine, about every 50 miles or so.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it would
warehouse
include
space,
workforce
too.
development. Sorry, Michael.
Where they're looking to have warehouse space, and then include not only kind of co-working spaces where they can have designers, they can have contractors, but also that fundamental workforce development, whether it is taking a traditional demo sub and just kind of amending or supplementing those skills, or kind of straight out into a trade school. Hey, not only this is what deconstruction looks like, but this is what material handling looks like. This is what intake processing, and then trying to utilize developing technologies such as pseudo material passports. We've had one on here before with Barbara Bachelum on her building ease, but also something like a replay. So yes, very much in development, but also kind of to Jenny's point earlier, an expansion of traditional reuse vendors, which in Massachusetts and I think a lot of the Northeast are heavily residential, and really unlocking that piece to go above and beyond, and what does kind of commercial look like through all of that.
I was going to say we started working on and some of that, like what does that look like and stuff, but it's going to be, you know, we put this group together 3 years ago and kind of not dreaming that we were in the right place at the right time, I don't think either. So eventually I think these pieces are going to come together, and if they want me to visit in the summer going up and down the east, you know, the East Coast, I'll go, because that would be really lovely.
That's a bird.
Well, Randy seems very open to any, he loves to talk, so.
Good.
Anywhere.
Good, okay, yeah, no,
it seems like his biggest obstacle is, you know, finding funding to really, I think he calls them incubator centers, incubation sites, you know.
Yeah. Part of the problem, I mean, part of the issue is, I hate to say this, and the way that we work and what Finger Lakes Reuse, which we keep alluding to, which I know, Michael, you've been there, is They take everything but the kitchen sink. We're just architectural salvage. We don't have space. We're in a residential neighborhood where we can only be open certain days of the week. Land is at a premium. So how do we make this work? And maybe the answer is that other place, and we're local. I mean, but there's other things that can be done, but it's just, space. It's about space, but the marketplace, we're kind of considered like, sometimes I feel like people consider us, we're just talking about this today because we have what we called it a reuse trail throughout Ithaca. Ithaca is very well known regionally that we have a lot of second reused and secondhand goods, but it kind of seems like a little garage sale talk, if you will. And so we need to get out of that mindset that we're not just the green people who are doing it, and everybody can do it, because everybody should be doing it, and a lot of people want to do it, but they don't know the easy way to get there, including developers too. That's the other thing with I haven't used the CARE tool yet, but I'm curious, if you put that together with, you're going to deconstruct a building and make it easy for people to, take the materials out and then reuse the materials. It's ease, it's community engagement, which I've done tons of community organizing. So it's kind of that thought too. And getting it to people to let them know what's going on. So
two other quick things regarding the resolution. If we've been very interested in creating a resolution for universities within New York State, namely my own, but then others as well. I think having universities really taking the lead, which there's a lot of room for improvement from my perspective on deconstruction and reuse. So yeah, a point of potential collaboration. And the other thing, I'm a land use planner, so I really want better scenario planning tools to enable me to hook up whole building life cycle analysis with more community scale decision making. So that's something where I've been trying to slowly make some progress, but hoping there can be larger scale partnerships for that as well.
Yeah, and our university lets a lot of stuff go. Last spring, we have 600 to 800 pieces of their furniture from a full restoration. Some of it being old commercial grade stickly from like the 1920s. So it's pretty interesting. But we have lots and lots of it still.
In consideration of time, seeing as it is just past 2, I'd like to thank both Jenni and Susan for their time today and their honestly riveting discussion and presentation. So thank you very much. Just to quickly about future meetings, the next meeting will be July 21st. We will have Melissa Wenzel of the Minnesota Pollution and Conservation Agency to talk about some policies promoting reuse and circularity that Minnesota, in their whirlwind progressive legislation sessions that they've been having, have been pushing. But to make sure we don't take everyone else's Friday away, we'll let everyone go. Please expect a meeting recap, the many links that were shared today, and a recording to be sent out as well. And if anyone here has any additional questions, please either send them directly to our presenters or to me, and I'll make sure they get forwarded over.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it, Michael. Not to make the last word, but yes, we really enjoyed ourselves, and stay in touch if you have questions. And I'm going to send you all the stuff for Schenectady. If anyone's interested, we'll see you in person there. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Nice weekend.